archaeologist, where I worked for the Boise National Forest for 34 years. And I bring that up because I'll put both hats on. I want to talk about how we got here today with our guest presenter, who I'm just so pleased has been able to come down. The foundation purchased this building in 1996 with the support of individuals in different communities. And in 1998, I became involved through my position with the Forest Service when they were pulling up the floorboards to stabilize the building. And by getting to know Rosemary and Greg Johns and Beth and PJ Briding, the foundation was able to apply for a rural community assistance grant through USDA and was awarded $15,000, which went to help repair the roof and the foundation of the building. And in doing that, Greg Johns and other members pulled up the floorboards, and we decided to host an archaeological excavation over the course of 2 years. So in '98, we were on the outside of the building, and in '99, we were on the inside of the building. And we had Dr. Priscilla Wares from University of Idaho, who's the director of the Asian American Comparative Collection, come out to help us with that excavation, the foundation. Fast forward a few years, quite a few years, and the Forest Service stayed involved and I stayed involved with the foundation from that time on. So fast forward several years, and in honor of the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, the Washington office, the Forest Service Washington office, distributed funding down to the individual units to help celebrate that 50-year mark. And so the Boise National Forest was offered a chunk of money to help celebrate that. And so I contacted Dr. Mark Warner at the University of Idaho and asked if we could use that money, if they would be agreeable to that, to establish a relationship through a challenge cost share agreement, so that the collections, the archaeological collections that have come out of the basin in the last 30 years could be analyzed and prepared for curation, and hopefully reports written on those that material culture that has come out. The Pon Yam collection is one of those collections. And so through that initiative in 2016, we seeded an agreement that has continued to be funded. And in a partnership with the Forest Service and the Idaho City Historical Foundation and University of Idaho, Renae was convinced to focus her doctoral dissertation on the Chinese and Boise Basin. And so I have spent the last several summers with Renae as she has come out to collect information on the Chinese who were here, as well as look at the collections. And right now, the Pon Yam collection is currently up at the University of Idaho, where it continues to be worked on. And so for the membership, I just want you to know that, we talk about the things that we do that are visible throughout the community with the year, with the 4th of July and St. Patrick's Day. But less visible is the research that's actually going on our collections. And so it is my just sheer pleasure to introduce Dr. Renae Campbell today, because on Monday I had the pleasure of attending her dissertation defense. And I think it was successful, and she was awarded.
I passed.
I think she's extremely relieved. And so I have seen a version of this. I think she's going to focus a little bit more on the Pon Yam collection today than maybe in her defense. She did in her defense where she was a little bit broader. But welcome, Renae. Thank you for coming down. We are so excited to see you.
Thank you, Susie. All right. Well, thank you everyone for having me, and thank you, Susie, for that lovely introduction. I'm really happy to be here and then to share some of the archaeological research that we've been doing. And to me, it's like extra significant that we're here in Pon Yam's house to talk about his collections. And I'm glad that you did the little introduction, because I was also going to say, what I'm presenting on today, you'll notice I say we a lot, and I'll reference the partnership, and that is the partnership that Susie talked about. although I have been working on this for like 6 years, I am not the only one. Thanks to the different collections that Susie has had transferred up to the university, there have been 2 other master's students who are doing their projects on collections, one who preceded me, and then one who's coming after me who's going to be doing more on the Pon Yam House collection, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But then we've also had over a dozen undergraduates come through our labs and get to use these materials in a really hands-on learning experience that's been just phenomenal for them. So it's, in addition to like adding to the research that you guys can use, it's a great tool for us at the University of Idaho, and it's helping contribute to a lot of educational programming.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that Renee's master's thesis work was on pre-World War II Japanese American archaeology, and she currently works with the works for the Asian American Comparative Collection at the University of Idaho with Dr. Priscilla Rucker.
Yeah. And if anyone's interested in the Asian American Comparative Collection or the AACC, I did bring some pamphlets and stuff that are on, I think someone set up on that little bureau over there. So, yeah. So I think that's it for my introduction. I am going to follow my notes today because I get really excited when I talk about this, and I could go on, and I don't want to keep you forever. So with that, I am going to start here today in this building, and I was told I should get a better picture of the Pon Yam House, so I'll work on that. That one's just mine that I took a few years ago. But yeah, so we're going to start here in this very building and with its most well-known proprietor, Pon Yam. I know that for many of you, this is a history that's probably more familiar than most of the people I talk to about it, so I'm going to keep it relatively brief and just try to touch on a little bit about the folks that lived here and also ran their businesses here, and then I'll move on to what we've done with the archaeological collection so far, give you a little update on that, and then briefly tie that into some of the work we've been doing, as Susie mentioned, on the Chinese mining sites in the forest and how that kind of all contributes to each other. So as many of you know, information on Pon Yam's early life is pretty scant, but it does indicate that like the roughly 400,000 Chinese migrants who traveled to North America in the 19th century, he was born in southern China's Guangdong province, which was an agricultural region about the size of Utah that by the time the news of the North American gold rushes reached it, had a long tradition of out-migration for work, of commerce, and of extended mining or extended familial networks supporting their migration patterns. And Pon Yam himself began traveling to the American West in the 1850s. He made his way into the basin about 10 years after that. The first definitive records of his presence here date to the 1860s, and these show him buying commercial and residential real estate, and then in Idaho City, and then also paying the $100 tax required of lottery ticket dealers, which is something I'll talk about a little more shortly. By 1870, he appears to have established himself as a member of Idaho City's small but growing merchant class. That year, he reported making about $1,000 in annual income, which put him roughly on par with other successful local merchants. The locations of his first businesses aren't apparent from any of the property records or census records that I've seen, but Pon Yam's subsequent enterprise is well documented. On June 3rd, 1873, James K. and Emmeline Reed sold 2 lots, a house, and this brick building for $1,500 to a group of men identified as Wong Chong & Co. in property records, who, according to the deed, had already at that time been using this site as their store. So although Pon Yam's signature doesn't appear on that document, later records do make it clear that he was at least an early partner in the business, if not also involved in the acquisition. And I say that because in all the property records I've looked at over in the vault, in the county recorder's office, and co is usually reserved as a designation for parties of 3 or more. So we know it's Wong Chung and probably at least 2 more people that bought the building. Potentially the 3 names that you see here. So this is a notice that began running in the Idaho City papers in 1875, announcing Wong Chung's departure from the enterprise known previously under his name, Wong Chong & Co. And this notice also lists Pon Yam and then a 3rd partner in the business, Pon Yep. And I have yet to find any other records tying Pon Yep to this store. So if you know of any, let me know. But it is possible that he remained invested in the firm long enough to have been misrecorded in the 1900 census as Pon Yet, who is listed boarding with Pon Yam at that point. By 1877, however, a nephew named Pon Sang, shown here, joined the firm and began participating in community events hosted by the store. According to the 1880 census, Pon Sang lived with Pon Yam and 2 other family members. Enumerators identified the first of these as Ah Hu and described her as Pon Yam's wife. But because we know Pon Yam had another wife in China and sons living there, it's likely that Ah Hu was his second wife. And that was, under prevalent Chinese customs at the time, meant that she was lower status than his first wife, but still a legitimate member of the household and part of his family lineage. She apparently lived with Pon Yam until 1887, when she is reported to have died at 49 years old. And then the 4th family member listed in Pon Yam's household in this 1880 census was Pon Bon, who is identified as Pon Yam's brother, so potentially also the father to Pon Sang, Pon Yam's nephew. And that his documentation sort of ends there. But we know that Pon Sang continued to be involved in the store and the business for more than 2 decades. Most notably, we have documentation from paperwork filed with immigration officials when he traveled between China and the Basin in 1897 and 1901. And these documents reveal that Pon Sang owned an approximate 1/3 interest in the Pon Yam store at that point in time, had resided in the Basin for more than 20 years, and had already been a widely known and recognized member of the community. After Pon Yam's death, it was also Pon Sang who signed the property over to the new owners in 1906. So while Pon Yam conducted business with these extended family members here, his own sons remained in China with their mother, in an example of what Asian diaspora scholars have described as a split household family, which is defined by the periodic absence of an adult household head who worked and lived abroad, so over in Idaho City, while the rest of the family stayed home. And although they would have been geographically distant, they still pooled resources, generally speaking, and split labor across that geographic distance. Guangdong split household families also frequently collaborated to support paternal and fraternal relatives' migration. Thus, Pon Yam's incorporation of male extended family members into his store was actually just one version of a strategy that played out in various businesses and homes across the Chinese diaspora. When successful, such strategies could maintain important economic and familial ties over long distances and periods of time. And then for Pon Yam and Pon Sang, they also helped ensure the endurance of Pon Yam's store, which would remain a fixture of Idaho City's business district and Chinese community for nearly 3 decades before passing through several other owners and eventually becoming the subject of an archaeological excavation, as Susie explained. Because of the size and complexity of the Pon Yam House collection, it is a really big collection. Our analysis at UI has been divided into 2 phases. So the first artifacts that we processed were those collected from within the building's footprint, under the porch, and then from excavation units. So in the map, they're the shaded units. And this group of artifacts we chose to look at first because it contained the most fragile seeds, incense sticks, and other materials that were in greater need of preservation. And then within that, there are roughly 26,000 items. They're kind of summarized just roughly by material type over there that are now fully cataloged and prepped for long-term curation. The remainder of the assemblage comes from the trenches, which are shown on that map, and those are now being looked at by another master's student named Juniper Harvey Morose, who just started her analysis about a year ago, and I think it's roughly halfway through that. So eventually the 2 will be incorporated together and we can have a nice tidy report of all of that. But what I'm going to talk about today are just the stuff from the initial first phase that I looked at. So even though that's maybe half of the collection, as you'll see, they still offer what I think is like a remarkable amount of evidence about Pon Yam's many business endeavors, the critical role that his store played in the community, and then even his connection to mining sites across the forest. So like Chinese merchants in the American West, Pon Yam tapped into Western markets and extensive transnational networks to maintain the heavy stock of staple goods that local correspondents found particularly abundant in the Basin's Chinese stores. Especially early on, getting goods to Idaho City could be a challenge, and newspapers record that Pon Yam used every means available to put merchandise on his shelves. In 1876, for instance, one of the articles up here shows that before railroads reached Boise, a pack train leaving the nearest transcontinental railroad station in Kenton, Utah, was carrying, among their many things, 115 packages of goods for Pon Yam up from Utah. In later years, Pon Yam himself often made the round trip to Boise to buy merchandise for his store, or on occasion placed orders for specialty items like live German carp, which the reporters say apparently arrived over roughly 30 miles of rough roads, still alive and wrapped in clover. Maybe. So numerous products in the Pon Yam House collection were undoubtedly sourced through sophisticated import-export companies that were run out of Hong Kong and are generally called Gold Mountain firms. And these, as early as 1850, supplied an immense amount of Chinese and other goods to merchants operating in even the most remote regions of North America. These include everyday items like Chinese toothbrushes, like this one here, which is amazing because it actually still has little bits of the bristle attached to the bone brush, which you don't see that often, and is something that from some very preliminary discussions with our experts up at UI, we think actually might make it a candidate for DNA testing. Or like the medicinal vial pictured here, which once held medical mint oil, which could be used to treat insect bites, burns, irritated skin, headaches, or dizziness. So, and then both of these things come from under the floorboards in here. So that's why they're beautifully preserved, and we can actually read the label on the medicine vial. A selection of tablewares offer other examples of imported Chinese products, and notably include both something called milieu, which were common folkwares used in China, like the wintergreen bowl pictured here on your left, as well as more expensive items like the ornate attribute of 8 immortals patterned teacup foot ring that was found in the collection there. Probably the most distinctive aspect of this collection, however, is the abundance of delicate plant remains recovered from under the floorboards again of Pon Yam's store. Among the more than 10,000 seeds, nuts, and pits are a number of native and imported flora common to Cantonese and Chinese American cuisine. In addition to suggesting ways that members of the Pon Yam household incorporated local and globally sourced foods into their meals, these macrobotanicals also offer some of the best archaeological evidence that we have to date of the full spectrum of snack food options reaching rural areas. Items like watermelon seeds, peanuts, and Chinese olives are known to have been really popular snacks in California Chinese towns, but have rarely, if ever, been found this far inland. Because these materials are really unique, we recently enlisted the help of Dr. Virginia Popper, who is a macrobotanical specialist at the Fisk Center for Archaeological Research at UMass Boston, to take a closer look at these. And she's going to help. She was actually really excited about the collection because this is her specialty, and she was thrilled to get to look at it. So she's preparing a report of her final findings, but so far she's identified, in addition to what you see up here, watermelon, ginkgo, plum, peach, apricot, almond, olive, apple, Chinese date or jujube, lychee, loganberry, 2 different squashes, cantaloupe, sunflower seeds, hickory, chili pepper, rice chaff, and a smattering of wild botanicals in the assemblage. So a huge amount of really exciting data coming out of that. Yeah. I know, it kind of makes me hungry, right? So her identification of rice chaff is actually very exciting because previous publications by her indicate that rice is consistently underrepresented in archaeological sites. It's something that deteriorates really quickly, so it doesn't often preserve. But in the basin, we do have evidence of the magnitude of rice that would have passed through stores like Pon Yam's, and that comes from some business records held by the Loki family just down the street that show them ordering from Boise $100 worth of rice at a time. So because rice wasn't cultivated in the United States in the 19th century, it cost a lot more than other grains. Ledgers and newspaper advertisements from the Boise Basin list the price charged for 10 pounds of rice between $1.40 and $2, which was consistently 4 to 5 times higher than the price of wheat. At the rate specified, Loki's $100 orders of rice would have purchased between 500 and 714 pounds of rice, even without a wholesale discount. So presumably demand for rice was such that they could reliably sell these large quantities despite it costing more than other grains. Other orders in those same business records suggest that the two varieties of beans identified during excavations could have also been products for sale in Pon Yam's store, alongside items like peanut oil, canned oysters, and crackers. Foodstuffs like the latter, though not preserved themselves, may nonetheless be present in a large quantity of archaeological recovered food canisters. Peanut oil, soy sauce, vinegar, preserved tofu, pickled vegetables, and seasonings like shrimp paste and sheet sugar, for example, could have arrived and been sold in the many Chinese brown glazed stoneware jars represented in the collection. And what's kind of unique about the Pon Yam House collection is we not only have the jar fragments, which we find out at the forest, but the cork stoppers have also been preserved. So that's pretty cool. Domestically canned meats, pickles, and European American condiments in Pon Yam's inventory, by contrast, may be inferred from the more than 1,500 bottle, jar, and can fragments. And while most of these are really broken, and so it makes it hard to identify the products, at least several items seem to have been expressly popular within the Pon Yam home and business complex. The first of these probably isn't surprising. It is Worcestershire sauce, a condiment that was introduced to North America in the 1840s and became so widely popular here that it was later bottled and then even manufactured in the United States to be closer to its customer bases. Numerous other archaeological and historical sources show that Chinese Americans counted themselves among this large customer base in the 19th and 20th century. And then an article in the Idaho Statesman mentions, quote, bottles of festively decorated Worcestershire sauce being taken to the Chinese laundries and vegetable gardens of Boise, where they will be consumed during the New Year's holiday. 15 bottles and 9 glass stoppers within this collection contain parts of Worcestershire sauce labels. Most can be associated with the authentic Lee and Perrins brand name, but this one here is unique because it's embossed with the name of a California-based company, Cutting & Co., which used the Worcestershire sauce name only until about 1874, when a lawsuit found the company guilty of trademark infringement and demanded that they stopped using the word Worcestershire. So that legal dispute really highlights that product's extreme desirability in that time period, apparently even among Pon Yam's many customer bases. Another product that seems to enjoy a period of popularity, but one that occurs sort of at the end of Pon Yam's occupation, is represented by 16 sun-colored amethyst bottle bases that are embossed with portions of the phrase, Armour's top-notch brand Chicago. So these bottles formerly contained grape juice marketed under the meatpacking giant's beverage department, which seems a bit odd to me that a meatpacking company would be producing grape juice, but there you have it. Advertisements in druggist journals from the 1910s described this grape juice as a thirst-quenching and health-conferring beverage. And other sources indicate that the examples in this collection were manufactured sometime between 1897 and 1918. But perhaps the most unusual beverages in the collection appear as 2 little glass bob seals that would have been attached to larger bottles. And they were bottles of absinthe manufactured by Edward Pernod in Cuvée, Switzerland. First distilled as a Swiss medicinal product, absinthe was introduced into the global markets in the mid-19th century by first Australian and then North American gold rushes. As absinthe spread from Switzerland to other parts of the world, it became more closely associated with liquor than medicine, which was the original connotation. But many consumers still inferred healthful qualities from the drink's bright green color and bitter flavor, a fact that may have actually helped it become more popular amongst hard-living gold rush communities. Still, it remained far less popular than most other types of alcohol, and those who did drink it used an elaborate ritual involving the addition of sugar and water by way of distinctive accoutrements like absinthe glasses, decanters, and spoons to mitigate what was apparently an unpalatably bitter taste and unusually high alcohol percentage. So these idiosyncratic qualities make it a pretty distinctive presence among the other products in Pon Yam's house collection, alongside things like toothbrushes, seeds, and ceramics, suggest some of the very diverse routes traveled by the foodstuff that ended up in Pon Yam's storeroom and his pantry. Other artifacts can be directly tied to many of the community-oriented activities known to have taken place within the walls of the Pon Yam House. As was the case at most Chinese stores across the American West, Pon Yam's businesses were what historians have described as a type of one-stop shop, offering Basinites a place to socialize, to purchase a home-cooked meal, to play a game of chance, to deposit gold for safekeeping, to send and receive mail from home, and to perform religious observances. Artifacts that allude to some of these functions include the more than 1,500 incense sticks that I counted diligently. Another artifact that, because of its really fragile nature, rarely preserves in archaeological collections, and so is almost virtually absent from the literature, but would have been a really crucial component of many traditional Chinese religious practices and customs as practiced by members of the diaspora. In private homes and businesses, for example, incense was regularly placed in ceramic burners that sat on small altars adorned with candlesticks and oil lamps, both of which also are included in the Pon Yam House collection. And in this context, incense served to honor deities, gods, and ancestors, to repel evil spirits, to attract good fortune or success, or to enhance the health of the practitioner through traditional Chinese medicine ingredients that could have been incorporated into the aromatic coatings on the incense itself. Beyond the domestic sphere, incense may have also played a role in at least two other activities that most closely align with Pon Yam's house use as a business establishment and social center. Gaming artifacts provide the context for the first of these: a Chinese lottery ticket fragment, 2 glass gaming pieces, and 20 dominoes indicate that games of chance were at least a minor component of life within the building. And Pon Yam's designation as a lottery ticket dealer, you'll remember from the introduction, in tax records provides evidence of that latter part. So to play the Chinese lottery, tickets were purchased from lottery houses or from individual agents. Each ticket was printed with the first 80 characters of a poem that contains no repeating characters, and selecting at least 5 from the ticket that matched those randomly drawn by lottery houses when you prize money scaled to the amount that you guessed correctly. Lottery games were popular enough amongst many Western communities that daily drawings took place both at lottery houses, within larger gambling establishments, or sometimes in smaller offices, which were often conveniently located within restaurants or merchant shops where your winnings could then be spent before you left the building. As a lottery ticket dealer, Pon Yam may have housed a small lottery office himself, or he may have just acted as an agent for a larger operation. Either way, combining this service with his retail goods could have had the additional benefit of encouraging additional purchases. According to ethnographic research done in the 1890s by Stuart Cullen, quote, "Before making a hazard in the Chinese lottery, the player frequently buys a bundle consisting of 2 small candles, a package of incense, and several sheets of joss paper. These bundles could be purchased at most shops, and then the incense could be burned at small altars that were specifically erected near lottery offices for that purpose." Celebrations were another time when incense was used as part of social events involving large swaths of the Boise Basin's community. Local newspapers recount both Pon Yam and Pon Sang partaking in communal celebrations, most notably those associated with the Lunar New Year holiday. Celebrated over 15 consecutive days, Lunar New Year in the Basin drew together various events and participation from Chinese and non-Chinese residents alike. Evidence of some of these occasions appear in the Pon Yam House collection as 78 rolled paper tubes from the shells of red or brown firecrackers, and from 2 pieces of bamboo tied with a string that resemble examples of firecracker propellers curated at the Asian American Comparative Collection. For merchants, Lunar New Year was also a time to decorate their shops, host guests, and give gifts to business associates and friends. In 1886, the Idaho World reported attending a New Year's Day festivity in Pon Yam's store, which they described as being adorned with specimens of Pon Yam's handiwork, including his paintings and decorative items, likely hand-painted banners, New Year's snacks like watermelon seeds or cookies, drinks like Chinese liquor or maybe even absinthe, and then candles and incense to celebrate the occasion. And incense burned on these occasions served both a personal purpose and a social one. In addition to its spiritual function, it would have invited friends and neighbors into stores for celebrations that helped build relationships, community ties, and business networks, all of which could have been a valuable resource for navigating life as a Chinese merchant in a turn-of-the-century gold rush town. Community services can also be inferred from 40 artifacts that are associated with writing, printing, or record keeping. Of these, calligraphy brush handles and bristles are the most numerous, but there's also a fragment of an ink grinding dish, an abacus bead, and several pencil fragments, and even pieces of printing type in the assemblage. The printing type is almost certainly left over from the building's prior use as a newspaper office, but others are consistent with the record-keeping requirements of running several businesses. Pon Yam undoubtedly maintained inventory lists, counted money, ran calculations, kept ledgers, or tracked purchases and expenditures in other ways. With calligraphy brushes and black ink prepared in small stoneware grinding dishes with green glazed rims, he may have also written correspondence and painted the banners that adorned his store for his holidays. As other Chinese merchants did, Pon Yam may have also used calligraphy brushes to write remittance letters on behalf of local community members that could then be sent through his same merchant connections to Hong Kong and home to Guangdong. Two artifacts, more than any other, though, really speak to the personal side of life inside this building. And those are these. They are a whiteware plate made by the Staffordshire Potter Company, and then a Four Seasons flowers pattern bowl. And each of them, it's really hard to see on the right-hand side, but each of them has something called a peck mark on the interior surface. Close & Company, the maker of the whiteware dish, made mostly earthenwares out of Staffordshire, Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire, which was a major export center for pottery in the 19th and 20th centuries, whereas the Four Seasons flowers was a type of everyday porcelain made in Jiangxi province in China. And in South China, this same pattern was often used in migrants' home villages alongside a greater diversity of Chinese manufactured wares that were occasionally modified by their owners with the addition of marks pecked through the glaze. So the owner would take a nail or some other small metal object and peck off little pieces of the glaze to make almost like a pointillism pattern that would leave a personal mark on the surface. And in various contexts, these marks take the form of names or identifiers of the owner, wishes for things like luck or prosperity or wealth, or sometimes even just abstract symbols. Frequently interpreted as individualized ownership marks, research conducted by transnational scholars further suggests that their presence in archaeological collections on both sides of the Pacific might reflect communal eating practices in which marked vessels make them easier to retrieve after something like a potluck. So they also really frequently occur in labor contexts where people are sharing ceramics. But the two within this collection are marked with two different characters. The first one is May, or beautiful, and then the second one is Gom, which as a noun refers to tapestry, gold, or brocade, but when used as an adjective can also mean bright or beautiful again. Since neither are Cantonese names, nor are they particularly similar to Pon Yam's name or any of the other known residents, it could perhaps be the shared meaning of beauty that made this significant to Pon Yam or whoever marked them. And there are many other artifacts that I could go over in this collection, but I think what I'm going to finish on are a group of materials that I just want to highlight because of their relation to mining. In a community founded on the pursuit of gold, it's not surprising that Pon Yam stocked essential mining gear. We found things like axes, files, picks, shovels, and fragments of rubber boots in the collection, which were undoubtedly popular among his customers, but also relate to another way that Pon Yam participated in his local community, and that is through mining and lumbering contracts with various associates throughout the basin. Newspaper articles in this bid list, which is from the Boise Mining Company's 1894 meeting notes, which are on file at the Idaho State Archives, indicate that by the 1880s, Pon Yam had begun overseeing lumber contracts, both along the Crooked River outside and then also locations outside of Boise. notably provisioning his crews with items, quote unquote, furnished from his store. Documents in the vault over there at the Boise County Recorder's Office also show that Pon Yam entered multiple mining contracts. Between 1895 and 1898, he signed 3 different leases for properties across the basin, each within a different mining district and with a different partner. In the Moores Creek Mining District, he leased claims with the Gum Lee Tong Company. In the Beaver Mining District, he leased the 80-acre Upper Hurdy placer claims with the Wing Lee Tong Company. And then in 1898, with partner Chin Choi, he leased the extensive Noble Placer Mine atop Grimes Pass. This last one is particularly noteworthy, not just because it was truly an impressively sized and scaled operation. You can see a little bit of that here. There's actually a sawmill on site. There's boarding houses. It was a huge operation. But it's also notable because it was negotiated not with the original owner of these claims, who would have been William Noble, but with his ex-wife, Hattie Noble, who had only recently filed for divorce and won in the Boise Basin's courts, not just her separation, but also sole custody of her 4 kids and full legal title to all of her ex-husband's properties and mining assets. Which for 1898 is pretty unusual. So that was obviously a rabbit hole I had to go down. And this is a drawing of Hattie Noble and William Noble in their house in Idaho City. Female mine owners like Hattie were very rare in the basin. Aggregating lease data from the County Recorder's Office shows that just 4 of the 86 mining leases signed between 1865 and 1900 involved women. But in every single instance, the leasing party was a Chinese mining company, which is a notable departure from men who leased to Chinese miners just 64% of the time. So in my dissertation, you can ask me about this if you want. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I do go into a little bit more detail about each of those leases and the really unique working relationships that they indicate Chinese miners were forming with women mine owners in the basin in order to create opportunities for both of them to enter an industry that had social and legal prohibitions against their participation. More to the point here, though, these mining contracts, like the services Pon Yam offered through his one-stop shop, the relationships he built with various members of his diverse mining community, and the goods that he stocked in his store and also supplied to mining crews throughout the forest, provide the context for understanding many other aspects of life in the Boise Basin. From our...
Can I ask a question about that building? Does anyone know where that was located, or is it still...
The big mine?
No, I'm talking about the house.
Oh, this one. I have the property record for it somewhere, so I have an address, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But I could look it up if you're interested.
Trudy probably owns it.
Yeah. maybe somebody recognizes it, huh? From our ongoing research on Chinese mining sites in the Boise National Forest, so the other stuff that we've been working on, we have been able to uncover also some connections to Pon Yam. So we suspect, for example, that sites leased by the Wong Sing Company along Grimes Creek had managers who purchased bulk orders of supplies from Idaho City's Chinese merchants. Some of those records appear in Lokey's business documents. And these orders would be timed to arrive in the early spring, often including as much as 500 pounds of tobacco, 250 pounds of beans, or 200 pounds of tea, which is a lot of a really light product, and might have been a way to bolster efficiency and autonomy as high mountain snow began to melt and mining companies began to operate around the clock. They also offer an idea of how Pon Yam might have run work crews at the really extensive Noble mine that we saw a few minutes ago. And then these same materials, though, also provided the material backdrop for daily life on all the mining sites that we're finding throughout the forest. Miners who cooked in large cast iron woks with ingredients shipped in a variety of Chinese brown glazed stoneware containers, tended to insect bites or tired muscles with traditional Chinese medicines, donned Levi's, we know from the rivets, suspenders and rubber boots, and even marked this small dish with what was likely a family name, sourced many, though not all, of these products through Idaho's Chinese merchants, including Pon Yam. So The good thing about this project is it's ongoing, and as we continue to add other collections and research, I personally think that these type of connections will be really informative and probably the best way for us to kind of uncover what life was truly like for people who endeavored to make the Boise Basin their home in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And so I am actually, in the interest of time, going to leave it there. Maybe not so much with a tidy ending, but with some of the potentials for growing this research and how much the Pon Yam House collection has really contributed to kind of the larger picture we're getting out of the basin. So thank you all again for letting me come and share some of this. And hopefully I left a little time for questions if that's, yeah?
I just was curious, Pon Sang, perhaps we should be interpreting Pon Sang more than we do.
Yeah, I only knew of him because I contacted the National Records Administration and I gave them all the names from the people in the census, and he was the one who had traveled back and forth, and so we actually have pictures and letters written about him, which I am happy to share with you guys. And I love that we have a photo of him.
Which I think is, again, remarkable. And then, I'm sorry, it's a twofold, but about women and mining claims, is that the tease?
That was the tease. Yeah, so the whole rabbit hole that I spent like 2 weeks in the county recorder's office going down. But essentially what it looks like is all of those women, they did not go out intending to be mine owners, but certain things happened in their life. So Hattie Noble, her husband, had a buggy accident on the road down here, and he landed on his head in a miner's tailings pile, and had to spend some time recuperating in an asylum, and eventually moved back to the basin. But like, it seems like he never quite recovered from that. Probably had some sort of traumatic brain injury, because then when she sues him for divorce, he's appointed a guardian by the court. And he sues her back, and the court just every time like knocks him down and grants her whatever she wants. So you can tell something was going on where he clearly couldn't have the capacity to take care of the kids. But then Mary Hogg, who is married to Nicholas Hogg, who owned the Miners Brewery in town, she inherited her husband's claims after he died and became a mine owner and briefly leased them to a Chinese company. And then Anne French was another woman in town who was married to a miner who ended up getting debilitating rheumatism, and he couldn't work any longer. And so she essentially takes over his claims, and the deeds all have his name, but she signs for both of them. And you can tell she's the only one present for the signing. So, and then in each case, they reach out. In Hattie's case, she already had, there was someone who was running the claims before. And she doesn't go back to him, she goes to a Chinese mining company. She actually leases it to 2 different Chinese mining companies, which my theory is that it just would have been easier in that time period for a woman to be in charge of a crew of men if they weren't like the same white men that worked for her husband. And for Chinese miners, there's already sort of this long tradition of, you know, Chinese domestic servants in homes and Chinese medicinal doctors taking care of female patients. There's a little bit more interaction between those two groups in general that might have made those relationships more comfortable.
I have a ton of questions. Good thing we'll be out in the field tomorrow. But I know that Mark Warner mentioned that your dissertation is has all these sideboards that you can make 5 dissertations out of it.
Yeah, that's a few of them right there.
So I'm assuming that one is, you know, the relationship between women and the Chinese community. And do you have the other ones that he may have had in mind, or I think what I'm struck by is that your research has shown that Boise Basin continues to be just a rich field for research.
Absolutely.
On the Chinese experience. So.
Yeah, there's a couple other really interesting, I think the seeds in and of itself, I'm sure Virginia Popper will want to publish on that, because that is some incredible data that we only really have from Market Street, Chinatown in California, anything similar. And that's such a different context that this is really informative in terms of like what's going on inland and later, and also like, you know.
I know Marianne Davis, who was our former associate state archaeologist for the Idaho SHPO here, she took some of the Dracontamelon seeds and showed them around, and nobody had really seen them. And so, I don't,
Yeah.
is this really the first place that they have been found in an archaeological context?
That's what I was going to ask you, having done the most recent research, but when we were doing that, nobody in the Northwest had ever found anything like that.
Market Street Chinatown is the only place that
Yeah.
those have been found.
Because,
Perhaps you could describe more what
Yeah,
you're
let me
talking
show you.
about.
I can go back to,
We call them our alien pods because if you
Yeah.
look at them just right, they have kind of like
and
little alien.
like Market Street Chinatown was in San Jose, California, and they did a bunch of excavations there, but not all of them. I think Virginia was really excited about some of the, maybe the lychee, and one of the other ones was kind of a new discovery. So I definitely think. And then in terms of finding them in the forest, the only other thing that I could find that was even roughly comparable was in Pierce, Idaho. Darby Stapp did some excavations up there, and Priscilla identified the Chinese olive pits from there. And so that's really the only other thing that's Priscilla Wagers, I should say.
Well, I think part of it's just the whole site that it came from, that it was dry. It
Right.
was protected, and archaeology sites up there, it's not going to happen. So.
Yeah, we do have a few like peach and plum pits from the sites in the forest, but none of the fragile stuff that you see from here. Yeah.
So I think you probably could come back at least a couple more times with different presentations, such as the faunal, which is
Yeah.
your analysis, the bone. But I also know that you looked at the Chinese sites over on Grimes Creek in the old Boston area, and some of those collections you looked at. Some of the sites still are with the Boise National Forest, and some of them are now in the Baumhoff family. So
Yeah.
she
That's another really like amazing area out there. Connecting all those sites is pretty cool, because Jessica helped me with the LiDAR. There's something called LiDAR, which is, it's a way that they fly a plane over and just take a picture of the ground surface. They can cut through the trees, so you just get a really detailed image of the ground surface, and you can actually see on there, if you cross-reference it with the old mining claims for the Wongsing Company, the Grimes Creek ditch, which was the really huge one that ran along the side of Grimes Creek and that supplied all these different mining claims. You can see it right on there, and the other ones that the Wongsing Company were using. It's like, yeah, very cool.
Were any of these artifacts at the university, will they ever come back here, or they stay at the university?
Yeah, they belong to the Idaho City Historical Foundation, so they all come back. But they'll be in nice curation quality bags and labeled and boxed up and stuff. But yeah.
Not tomorrow, right?
Not tomorrow. So that's the other grad student who right now is working on the other half of this collection. It'd be nice to keep both halves together until we're done and then deliver them all at once. But she should be done within the next, she's halfway through her master's. So, but that would be another really exciting presentation to get, is once we have all the stuff from the trenches, looking at those two groups of data combined.
We need to plan to receive these things in a few years.
I think the U of
Yeah,
I's
if you-
has just like exponentially expanded the exhibit potential in here.
Yeah.
Interpretation.
And that's something we'd be happy to like draw, pick out specific things. Like I think those Peckmark ceramics would be amazing to put on display, just because they offer such a personal connection to the people in the house and stuff.
So I'm easily amazed, but peanut shells. What are peanut shells doing in the basement of the Pon Yam? Or the crawl space?
Well, they were snack foods, right? So he was selling them out of his store probably, and then when you crack open a peanut and you have old floorboards, they have gaps sometimes and they fall between
I
the...
got that part, but I didn't realize peanuts were a thing in the 1800s, and
Yeah.
they came from the eastern United States, correct? Southeast?
I think originally South America, but yeah, then Chinese cuisine incorporated peanuts as snacks pretty early on too, and I think were also grown beginning in South America and then parts of the U.S. and then also in China at some point.
You know when that occurred, growing up in China?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, I'm never putting them in my compost.
Just save them under your floorboards.
They're not going to compost, I don't think.
Yeah.
We've got one more, maybe a little bit more serious question. That is the Chinese-American comparison. What is that organization?
It's a laboratory up at the University of Idaho. It was started by Priscilla Wagers in 1982 as a way to identify artifacts that are found on Chinese American and then later also Japanese American sites. And so what we have is just a huge collection of whole examples of all of these artifacts. So that's why I'm able to show you, where's the one with the firecrackers or that ink dish come from the Asian American Comparative Collection, and then this would be the one that we found in the Pon Yam House. And you can see that's kind of hard to identify if you don't have the big thing.
What's the thing at the bottom?
This thing? Oh, that's just a scale, that thing. Yeah. And so it's basic, it exists just, it's a nonprofit entity that exists to help people do research on stuff like this. And that was part of why I've been really lucky to work there and bringing these collections up. It just made the analysis so much easier to have all of those resources.
So is this like a 20-year project? How long have you had the collection?
It could be. It certainly could be.
It's a 40-year project. How long have you been doing it?
Well, we started the partnership.
95,
Well,
96
yeah,
is
but-
when we bought the building.
Right, but the collections were handed over to University of Idaho in 2016.
Okay,
And
that's when that started.
And this wasn't the first collection we handed over to
Right.
them. So
Yeah.
they have just been making amazing strides in the collection analysis for Pon Yam, as well as a couple other really big ones that came out before. So to
Yeah.
speak.
Did they ever do any gold assaying in this building that you know of?
Potentially. I haven't found that written up in the newspaper or anything, but yes, potentially, because there was also liquid mercury found in the excavations, which could have either been used for assaying or was also used in mining, so it could have potentially also been for sale in the building.
You know, Pon Yam's gold scales are over there. Yeah. But
Yeah.
we did find, Greg Johns, I think, recovered the liquid mercury from here.
Well,
Yeah.
well, the reason I
I
was
think that
asking
could be
is I was part of I helped tear the place apart and put it back together.
Oh, cool.
And so after everything was done and all of the trenches were covered and the end of it, we were getting ready to put the floor back together. And it was really interesting when Gregory took the floor apart, he numbered every single board and then made a map of it.
Uh-huh.
And so when we went to put it back down again, it was exactly like it was, which was really kind of cool. Very tedious.
Yeah.
But anyway, before we covered it up, I took home some buckets of dirt. And in the dirt is gold.
Huh.
And also there was a ton of chaff, wheat chaff.
Yeah, uh-huh.
A ton of it. And so when we go to try to pan out a little bit of the dirt, I'd have to put it in water and then the chaff would float to the top. And then we clean that all out. Then we put it in the pan and pan it out. But every single pan that we've done out of these buckets that I took home had gold.
Had gold in it. Oh, fascinating.
I mean, not like pop your eyes out gold.
Right.
You are wealthier, right?
For this
Well-
experience.
And I think, Pon Yam is reported to also have held gold for different members, acted as a bank for different members of the community too, and he would have been sending remittances home to China, and so there's lots of reasons there would be gold in that building. That's a really cool story.
It was actually because the ground underneath the building hadn't been disturbed, and there was gold already here, or whether it did fall through the floorboards.
Yeah.
And so anyway, kind of interesting.
And then the thing you're describing with the wheat chaff floating, that's actually a technique that archaeologists use to take float samples of dirt, and that's what Dr. Popper was doing to find all the so she does macrobotanicals, which are down to even pollen and stuff, so she can find all sorts of stuff by floating. So we had some soil samples in the collection that we sent to her, and she actually did that, and that's how she found some of that stuff. She was using the same technique you were using.
When we had some relatives of Minetta Schreitz visiting this summer, and Minetta was one of the women that, I don't know, she donated a whole lot of money to procure this building.
She did.
And anyway, so the relatives were visiting, and they were young people in their 30s, and they wanted to pan for gold. So I had this pile of dirt, and I had it covered with some sheets of tin. And so I went over and got some dirt out for them, and I went to clean it out, expecting the chaff, but it had decomposed, so and it composted.
Huh. So once you exposed it to,
Yeah,
Huh.
so I took it out
Fascinating.
Yeah, so I didn't. That was one step I didn't have to do anymore. Isn't that curious?
yeah.
Interesting.
Is this the only fragment of the ink dish, for example, that was found?
In this collection, yeah. Juniper might find some in what she's looking at outside, but yeah, that's the only. A lot of the materials that I looked at, because they're from inside the house, are really small fragments of stuff. That's like most of the things, except for that really cool Worcestershire glass bottle that was amazingly complete.
Can you, so did I see that correctly, that in the 1880 census that Pon Yam's brother was here?
Mm-hmm.
So I was not aware of that. And I'm just wondering, can you comment on how easy or hard it is to do research through NARA on the Chinese who came and went?
It has gotten easier since COVID. You used to have to go to their offices, and then now they will take research requests post-COVID. I think because they shut all their offices during COVID, and now suddenly they'll take research requests. So I emailed, but you have to go, the difficult part is you have to go to each individual office. So there's, for example, every port city that Chinese migrants would have come into has a different office. So there's one in Seattle, there's two in California, and then there's also a national one that's now through the Immigration and Naturalization Service in Washington, D.C. And so I submitted research requests to all of them, and Pon Sang was the only one of the Pon Yam household members that they had records on. So it also comes down to like whether or not people were coming and going. There would be a record each time they left the country and then came back in. So for example, like Chinese miners didn't go home to China a lot in between, whereas merchants would travel much more frequently. So none of the Chinese mining sites, I wasn't able to find any of those individuals. And then I wasn't able to find Bon Pom for whatever reason either.
And so did you find out what happened to Pon Sang eventually?
Eventually, he was in Idaho City when Pon Yam decided to go home to China and then ended up dying. And so Pon Sang briefly, he runs a advertisement in the paper saying he's revitalizing, the company's now under his name and he's reopening the doors. But then like a month later, another letter runs in the Idaho World that's from Pon Yam's wife in China that she sent through a notary, and she disputes his claim to the business. And she has a different relative in mind that she wants to take over. And I don't know what happens there, but within a year, Pon Sang sells it for $1 to the next owners. So I think that probably his ownership got contested and he wasn't able. It seems like maybe he wanted to continue running the business and then wasn't able to because of the politics.
Are there to do research in China, or is it?
Yeah, they're like starting to be.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we could talk about more, but yeah.
And what was the outcome of what business then took it over after?
It was the folks who owned the merch bought it. Is it Lippincott? I can't remember their names.
Warner.
Yeah, and Warner. They bought it and used it as a storehouse basically for a while for their building, and then it went through. Eventually, was a private home and a couple other iterations of ownership.
What was the biggest surprise, Renae? Or the most exciting thing of your research?
Oh boy. I love all of it. I think for me it's like connecting to the people's stories. So finding things like Pon Sang or Hattie Noble's life story, stuff like that. That always really makes me happy, especially if I can connect artifacts to them. So again, I think that's why I like the peck marks on the ceramics, because you can see someone sitting there.
In that census, you got Pon Yang, and then right below it there, I can't remember, that his wife? Again, did you talk about her?
That's his wife, but my theory is that that's his second wife, because other newspaper articles refer to a wife who stayed in China. And it would have been a pretty common practice during that time period for wealthy Chinese men to have more than one wife at a time. And usually the first wife was the one that stayed home and sort of ran family business in home villages, while the second wife was freed up to travel to the United States with their husband. And so that's kind of my theory why she's his second wife.
So she would have probably been very involved in the business too, probably.
She very well could have been. And there's some really cool data from the Loki family that shows that his daughters were super involved in the businesses. So yes, I do think. And there's also, there's a little bit of evidence, although it hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, that a lot of the burning of incense and home altar worship was done primarily by women household members. So that also could be something in this collection that ties directly to Hugh rather than to Pon Yam.
Does anybody know what happened? I mean, is there any way of tracking what happened to her?
The Idaho World runs her death notice. So I know she died at one. I think I have it in here, but I forget what date.
49.
She was 49, and it was, I forget what year, but we do know she died in the, and the Idaho World ran it as like Pon Yam's wife has died.
So she died here in Idaho City? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that clerk under the wife?
Yeah, so that's someone else who's living in his.
But is that related to the wife?
I don't know. She could, or he could be just a boarder, because Pon Yam also had boarders. But this is also really interesting to me that this person has his same surname.
Right.
There's another Pon who's identified as a porter. So whether that's another male relative or
Is that a common name?
not super common, but in Guangdong it was often like villages would be organized around extended familial lineages that would have included a number of people from the same last name. So he's probably a relative of some sort. I don't know how close.
So Pon's kind of a surname.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pon would be the last name, like the surname. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Anything else?
Lots
Cool.
of good.
Well, again, thank you.